I've been learning Mandarin Chinese now for about 7 days or so, and though it's only been about a week, I wanted to talk about my experience so far in learning Mandarin Chinese and just how the language has been going overall for me and what I have gotten from this experience of learning Mandarin Chinese. Obviously, it's no surprise that Mandarin Chinese is a pretty tough language for a lot of people out there. I mean, you look at the language and you just think, like, how the hell am I going to start learning this language? And I kind of was the same as well, and I don't even know why about a week ago I decided to look into Mandarin Chinese. I've been wanting to study Mandarin Chinese for quite some time now, and I just decided that it was about time that I get into studying a little bit of Mandarin so that I actually understand at least a little bit more about the language and the culture. And it wouldn't be as strange for me to see like Chinese characters or Chinese influence or anything like that, because obviously studying the language and the culture will help you to become familiar with all of these things. And obviously Chinese is a big language, it is the most spoken language in the world, and so I wanted to actually take some time to understand at least a little bit more of the language. And in doing so, I've realized that I really would like to continue learning Mandarin, but obviously I have other languages to look at as well, and so I don't quite know at the moment what I'm going to be doing going forward with Mandarin. But for the last week or so, I've definitely been pretty much every single day going pretty hard at studying Mandarin Chinese, pretty much all through Link, the app/website that you can use to read in other languages. And as you can see here, I've done over a 30-day activity, although I've done about 8 or 9 days, and so I can only do 7 or 30 days. So over the last 8 or so days, I have done apparently 13,000 words of reading, 9.12 hours of listening, and this many links created here. And then you get like coins per day as well. I'm already 8 times the amount of daily coins met, and it's only like 10 a.m. right now. And you can see down here, I've done as many as 59 times the amount of coins met on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday as well. 51 times the amount of coins met. So like, if for people who obviously don't use Link, that probably means nothing to you, but you earn coins through listening, through reading, just through activities that you do on this app. Obviously like 50 coins is kind of where I've set my daily limit, because it's kind of like a low echelon of like an entry requirement for your daily goal, I guess. I mean, in this case, I've been smashing it. On Friday I was only 9 times as much, but otherwise I've been 32, 30, 59, 51, 51, today 8 times as much. And like I say, it's only 10 a.m. I've only been up for like an hour or so. These are my stats so far. And then if we go over here, we can see that like it starts to peak up here, and we get more and more with the words of reading. And if we look at other things such as known words maybe, you can see again it's just peaks up, and pretty much all of these look the exact same. So pretty much you can see I was at 0 for a long time, because obviously I'd never really picked up on Mandarin Chinese on this app, or in general to be fair. And then apparently it was on the 31st of the 10th on Halloween that I decided to at least look at it a little bit, apparently like a really small amount. And then it was about a week ago that I decided to really like look at the language and start listening to a lot of the mini stories and some of the graded readers. While I'm at work, I drive, and so I'm able to listen to a lot of my like languages then, and so I've listened to a lot of Mandarin in the last week. But also when I'm at home, I'll do like study, and I will literally use Link to kind of click on the blue words to then make like new connections and new words, etc. If you know how Link works, and you know pretty much what I'm talking about. In general, it's been quite a fun process, and being someone who's kind of struggled in the past with Japanese and Korean, and I want to get back into Korean because, as I've mentioned in a previous video, I will be going to South Korea in a few months, and I've not really made much progress as of yet towards that language, and instead for some reason I'm picking up Mandarin Chinese. I don't quite know why I decided to go for that, to be honest, with Mandarin Chinese, but I just decided to, like, as I say, like a week ago, just look at Mandarin Chinese, and then the next day I was like, I want to look at some more Mandarin Chinese, and then some more. And before I knew it, I'm watching vlogs in Mandarin Chinese with English subtitles. I'm also watching just normal English vlogs about these people in China. All of a sudden, I've gained like a huge fascination with Chinese culture, language, and the fascination of wanting to go to the country to spend like an extended amount of time there, to travel around China, and obviously vlog my experience with my new vlog camera that I've not yet tried out, but I've got one of these bad boys that I will be using soon when I get back into vlogging. Obviously I get all these ideas, and a lot of them probably won't come to fruition for a long time at least, but there's a lot that you can do in China, and there's so far, like, I list things down and there's like 12 different cities so far that I want to visit in China and explore via, vlogging and showing it onto YouTube. And yeah, like, I don't know, there's always something new that I'm discovering every day so far with like the country, and I'm discovering a lot of it through the language of Chinese, and it's just so far been really fascinating for me to make all of these discoveries. I think a lot of people look at Chinese and they think to themselves like it's quite a difficult language, and you wouldn't be wrong in thinking so, but probably for the wrong reasons. Obviously it's difficult when you're looking at it on paper, when you just see Chinese characters, because obviously 0 of those characters mean anything to you, being probably an English speaker or a speaker of a Western language. So obviously these Chinese characters don't mean anything to you, and so you're just kind of looking at them like there's no way to kind of figure out what these characters mean. Luckily, Chinese also has a romanization system called Pinyin, and that pretty much just puts it all in romanization characters, which may still look a little bit confusing because there's all these like lines and stuff on top of the letters, on top of the vowels. And to be honest, this took me all of about half an hour before I figured out exactly how it worked, and I pretty much knew from then how to basically read in Pinyin, although there are still character combinations that make different sounds, which I'm still getting used to. It's kind of like, just for me, when I like learned to read in Polish, it was just like getting used to the different letters making different sounds, and it just takes a little bit of time, but with enough reading, such as what I'm doing here on Link, I will eventually, hopefully, become a lot more accustomed to the sounds and everything of Mandarin Chinese. But basically all of the accents that you see on the vowels when you see Pinyin is pretty much just telling you which tone you use, which is another reason why Mandarin can be quite difficult, because it has tones in the language. It's known as a tonal language, which means that like different tones of a word could make the word mean a different thing. One that everybody uses, so I'll use this example as well, and forgive me for my pronunciation because I'm only a week into Mandarin, so I probably won't have the tones nailed down to a T, but everyone uses the same example of ma, 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 which is different ways of saying ma. I have no idea which order I potentially said those in, but I'm hoping that you get an idea. Like in English, when you ask a question, you'll go from really to really. So it's kind of the same thing. That's like a rising tone, but you also have a lowered tone, and then you have one that kind of lowers and rises, and then you have one that's just a flat tone, and then you have one that's just a neutral tone, which is just very, very similar to the flat tone in my opinion. And to be honest, it's quite difficult for me to listen to words and kind of pick out which one's which, and obviously the Pinyin helps me to know which one the tone is, but it's still quite difficult for me to replicate that because I haven't trained my vocal cords to kind of be able to make those sounds. And I think it's something that even if you know Chinese for like a long time, you've been learning for a long time, I think it's still something that people struggle with, which would be the tones. And I don't think that the biggest thing in the world, context, can help you distinguish between like one tone and another. But at the same time, Chinese is known as a monosyllabic language, which means that pretty much every word you ever learn in Chinese is just one syllable. In some cases you may have 2 syllables, but that'll be 2 different words in Chinese kind of put together, such as the word diannao, which means computer in Chinese. However, if you break down the 2 components, Dian means electric and Nao means brain, so it's literally just saying electric brain as opposed to computer, but the whole meaning means computer. But essentially, Chinese is a monosyllabic language, so this means that there are only so many sounds you can make in Chinese before you kind of run out, and there are more words and more things to express than there are sounds that you can make in Chinese, even with all the tones. And so you start to get a lot of homophones in Chinese, which is pretty much what I just explained with the ma situation. But you have that with a lot of different words in Chinese. I mean, so far I've encountered pretty much every possible sound that you can make in Chinese. There's at least 2 or 3 different meanings, in some cases more. There's a very famous poem in Chinese which is to do with the word shi, but there are all these different characters in this poem that all are pronounced as shi in some tone or another, so it ends up being something like shi 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 shi, or you get the idea. They're all the same word but with a different tone, and it's pretty much just an entire poem with the same word, but it has like a complete meaning and it makes sense as far as I'm aware grammatically in the sense of this poem. And I'm not quite sure if it's the same as the English version of like buffalo, 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 buffalo. Even after it's explained to most English people, you're still a little bit confused, but it does actually make sense grammatically. It's just not a very typically used sentence, and there's a few examples of this in English as well. So I'm not quite sure if the she poem is like the same thing in Chinese, where like it's quite difficult for people to actually understand it even when they read it, but the thing exists, and Chinese does have a lot of homophones because of the way that the language is monosyllabic. Surprisingly, over the last week or so, I didn't think I was going to be making as much progress as I have done so far in Mandarin Chinese, and yeah, I surprised myself with, so far on Link it says 445 words known that I've marked off as known in the language, and though that's kind of a little bit inflated because of a few names that I've marked off, and also of numbers as well, because numbers are obviously written out in the Chinese characters, and so they're kind of counted as a word as well. But in general, like I've still built up a decent little base of words which I now know, and you know, a lot of those include pronouns and basic verbs and things like that, which I didn't know previously and now making a lot more sense to me. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube talking about Chinese grammar and how pretty much Chinese has no grammar, and so it's one of the easiest languages in regards to grammar. I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit because, I mean, of course Chinese has grammar, all languages have grammar. Grammar is pretty much at the very basic, at the very minimum, how a sentence is formed. So, you know, like you need grammar pretty much to at least form a sentence, because the grammar is telling you the order of the sentence you put the word. So at least there's that with grammar, but also there are more things in the Chinese grammar, such as particles and a few other things I've picked up on. I would like to say that I think what people mean to say is that pretty much it's so simple that it pretty much, or might as well not exist in a way, because Chinese doesn't have verb conjugation, it doesn't have grammatical gender, and it doesn't have grammatical cases. Let alone anything else that really makes the grammar too difficult. Chinese does have, as I say, particles, which doesn't seem to be too difficult to learn. It seems like a basic version of Japanese because it's nowhere near as prevalent as it is in something like Japanese. And on one or two occasions, I've found myself actually kind of being able to figure out the pattern of a particular grammar structure or grammar point, such as when I saw wo, which means me or I, and then I saw wo men, which means we, and then I saw ta, which means he, she, or it, and then I saw ta men, which means they. And so I thought the difference is adding men on the end of these pronouns to make them into the plural. And so when there was ni for you, I thought surely for you all, or you plural, it would be ni men, and sure enough, it was ni men. And again, I'm probably really butchering these tones after only a little bit of time spent in the language. I've done pretty much no speaking in the language, by the way. I've done a little bit of like pronunciation, but literally not too much at this point. So this in the video is kind of one of the first times that I'm speaking properly in Mandarin Chinese to try and give some examples, hence why I'm really like struggling with some of the pronunciations maybe. I'm not sure. Let me know if you learn Chinese or if you know like Chinese at all, how I'm doing with that. But yeah, from wo to wo men, ta to ta men, and ni to ni men, like it just made sense to me. And then yeah, you pretty much add men onto the end of pronouns and something else, I think, to make them plural. That was a very basic grammar structure or grammar point that I was able to actually figure out on my own after seeing it in a couple of other examples. I just kind of added you know, like logic to the puzzle almost, and it made sense. Chinese doesn't have conjugation of verbs, for example, which is such a huge thing because you learn a verb and then that's it, like you know the verb. You can say she for to be or is or am or are, and so you can say I am or he is or anything else related to that verb, and it's just the same word, she. So in that point of view, like, yeah, the grammar is actually quite simple in Chinese. It does still exist, however. You know, don't go into Chinese thinking there's absolutely zero grammar, as I've literally seen some YouTube videos try and claim. There is grammar in Chinese, but you know, it's just not as prevalent as in many other languages that at least I've studied. It's actually quite simple when you look at the language and you see the grammar is actually pretty simple. The hardest thing with Chinese so far for me has got to be the characters, Hanzi. But to be honest, I'm not even focusing on the characters right now. I'm just focusing on the Pinyin. That's just because obviously it's easier for me. Like Pinyin makes sense to me. I can read it, and it's basically like reading any other language that uses the Latin script. So why wouldn't I use Pinyin to help me learn the language? And if I go through with learning Chinese for the next however long, I will not be learning the Hanzi for at least 6 to 12 months, at least, until, you know, pretty much I've got some kind of basis of the language, until I'm able to speak comfortably, I would say, in the language. Obviously, even 6 to 12 months may be a short amount of time, especially in like Japanese or Chinese, where you have like all of these thousands of different characters. I think it's a good idea to not focus on those and not worry about those until you're able to actually speak the language, at least to some degree. To go in on day one and go, ni hao ma, that's all I can say. Okay, so this is the character, how do I write that? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, don't worry about writing the character, just worry about speaking and trying to get words out, because like for most people, learning a language is about being able to communicate and about being able to speak. And so if you go to China, for example, after learning the language and your goal is to speak with people, and you go there and you've learned how to write characters but you don't know how to speak, then that's not your goal achieved. Instead, you want to learn how to speak and communicate with people. But I will say that in China, from what I've seen from like thousands of vlogs and stuff that I've seen, you know, like there is a lot of Chinese characters written all around anyway, and so it is useful to learn in regards to being able to read menus, for example, and to read billboards and signs and that kind of thing. So it's not something that I would completely disregard, you know, but it's just the more important thing at learning a language is to be able to speak, and so that's my focus at the moment, and that has been my focus. Obviously, I have been picking up on some characters because I've been learning via the method of reading, and though there is Pinyin, there is also obviously the characters attached to that Pinyin, and so I've just kind of been getting used to some of these characters anyway, but it's definitely not a focus, and I'll be focusing more on Chinese characters if and when my Chinese gets to a level of where I'm comfortable being able to speak, probably to the same level as where my like Spanish is at the moment, maybe. But I always find that when learning languages, there's kind of, you know, when you're ready to start learning either a new language or a new part of the language. In this case, I think I'll know inside when I'm ready to start learning the characters, when I think I'm ready to move on to the next step, as it were, in the language, to start becoming a bit more integrated with the language. And so I just wanted to say that because I think a lot of people focus too much on the characters way too early in their studies. Some people will swear by it, but this is just my opinion on the whole matter itself. I don't think there's much use in beating yourself up and trying to write like the same character 200 times on a sheet of paper, you know, to try and get down the stroke order and everything, because ultimately it doesn't matter. You may still forget the pronunciation, and there are, you know, you may get this one character down by writing it thousands of times or whatever, but there are, you know, something like 80,000 characters in total in Chinese, and so you're kind of a losing battle a little bit, trying to repetitively like write the same character all the time, you know, or the whole, like, focus on one character in a day or something. I don't know. Like, to me, it just doesn't make sense until you're able to actually speak the language, and once you can speak it, you can then not only attach it to like what you know from like the Pinyin or whatever, but I don't know, you like, you know how to use the word, you know how the word is used in different contexts and whatever else, and so adding a mental image to that after you know the word, it's not going to be as difficult as trying to learn everything all at once. So that's just my kind of point of view on it personally, and that's why I'm not going to worry about learning the Chinese characters at the beginning, at least for, I mean, I would estimate 6 to 12 months if I was being serious about my Chinese learning and I continued on the same path that I'm currently on. However, I probably will have to eventually kind of put it on a little bit of a stop for, I guess, a bit of a hiatus, because I do need to start looking into Korean, because I actually have a trip to Korea that I'm going to, as I mentioned, and so that's more important. But Chinese has been definitely something that I'm just having a lot of fun with right now, and so that's why I'm studying Chinese right now. And then maybe after I've been to Korea, I can then get back into Chinese, but we'll see about that. But that's basically my like thing on like the Chinese characters anyway. So though the characters are, like, in my opinion, the hardest thing about the language, I wouldn't even focus on those or worry about those until you're comfortable in the language in regards to speaking, listening, and just like a basis of your knowledge of words and vocabulary, phrases, that kind of thing. And to be honest, this is my same like kind of philosophy, I guess, or whatever, on any language that's a different script or different like writing, but especially in Chinese and Japanese, because there are just so many characters, it's really overwhelming. In something like Korean or Russian or Arabic, I would do the same thing, but I would slowly learn the writing system as I go along. And when I know words really well, I'll then look at how those words are written, and then I'll kind of break down those words into individual sounds and characters. And that's pretty much how I learned to read in Cyrillic. But anyway, back to Mandarin Chinese. I think some people get a bit like kind of overwhelmed still over the fact that they don't know where to start. There are no real cognates when it comes to English and Chinese, and so where do they start in learning anything? First of all, most people pretty much know the phrase ni hao, or the word ni hao, which means hello. It's a greeting, but if you were to break down the two characters of ni and hao, you literally get you and good. They're just saying you good, and then you can say ni hao ma, which is are you good, are you okay. Ma is a spoken question mark, which I guess is part of the grammar as well, thinking about it. You speak the question mark as in ma when it's a yes or no question, I believe. The same as in Japanese when you say nan desu ka, like the ka is the same thing. It's the same function for those who know Japanese as well. It's not something we have in English, of course, but in English we do have a rising tone. So instead of rising tone to emphasize this, they just speak out the question mark. If you break down the two characters, ni and hao, you get you and good. So you can use these in different senses. As I mentioned earlier, ni men is you all, because it's the plural of ni, which is just you. When somebody asks you ni hao ma, you can say wo hao or wo hen hao, which means I'm good or I'm very good. And then you can say ni ne. So you're using ni and also hao in those two contexts to then kind of use in your reply. Ni ne is and you, or what about you? And wo hen hao is I'm very good, or wo hao is just I'm good, depending on which one you want to use. So that's just an idea of one word that you can break down into its two individual components to then use for other words. And you can pretty much do this from a lot of different Chinese words and stuff. And obviously I've only had a week to do this myself. But then I decided to look at things such as words that I already know in Chinese, such as city names, because they're pretty much the same. And so looking at city names, I discovered that you can get more vocabulary from words that you already know to give you a little bit of a start in Chinese. Now, I will admit that some of these are probably not the most useful words, but the more words you know, the better. And so, you already know these words in English, most probably some of these cities at least. So you might as well use that to your advantage and at least understand where these words and characters come from. And so you look at a city such as Beijing, you can break it down again into its two characters and look at the first character, Bei, which means north, and Jing, which means capital. So together it just means northern capital. But you look at another one such as Shanghai, and again the first character, Shang, means above, and Hai means sea. So again, it just really reflects on it being a coastal city and saying that it's above the sea or something along those lines. And then looking at some other cities quickly, we've got Wuhan, which means martial or military for Wu, and Han just refers to the river Han. We've got Shenzhen, where Shen means deep and then Zhen means drainage or ditch. So together that means deep drainage, which is a reference to the city's location near rivers and marshlands. The city of Chongqing has Chong as double or ri, as in repeating, and Qing as a celebration or joy, so the meaning could be seen as a double celebration, which is something to do with the history of when an emperor was promoted twice in a short period. We have the city of Guangzhou, which Guan means broad or expansive, and Zhou means prefecture or state, which means expansive state, referring to pretty much the province being such a large area. And then we have Nanjing, which is similar to Beijing, which is south capital instead of north capital. So you already can see that by taking words that you already potentially know, such as at least some of these cities, I know that a lot of people don't really know a lot about Chinese cities, but you know at least Beijing at the very least. By taking these words that you already know, you can break them down and kind of extrapolate different words from these characters that you may already know in your head, but you don't realize that you already know them. Something I've not yet got around to is looking at Chinese food items and seeing if from my local Chinese that there's like kind of meanings behind some of these words, such as chow mein or the American version lo mein. But what I did do is look at how to say my name in Chinese, which ends up being Jamie, which what they do in Chinese is that they get a westernized name such as Jamie, and then they find two words that pretty much try and match as close as possible to the pronunciation of what my name is, Jamie. Jamie is pretty much the closest they've got, which is pretty accurate. And I thought it was quite funny because when you break down the two words, Jie means outstanding or heroic, and then Mi means rice, and so my name in Chinese is literally Outstanding Rice, and so from now on I'll be known as only Outstanding Rice. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video, or at the very least learned something new. Maybe not all of you are into Chinese or Chinese culture or whatever, but I found like something that I didn't know I previously had such a love for, which is the language of Chinese. I think it really spoke a lot of volume to me when I didn't think I could learn much Chinese after struggling with Japanese and Korean in the past. And I've really shown myself wrong by actually learning so much more than I thought I ever could, especially within just a 1 week period. And I think it really shows me personally as a language learner and an enthusiast that actually, like in general, whether it's languages or whether it's something else, you don't know until you just go for it and you just try and learn whatever it is you want to learn. You may just surprise yourself. And, you know, with Chinese, I've surprised myself with how much so far that I've been able to learn and how much I've been able to kind of remember and keep in my mind. So whether it is Chinese or whether it's Spanish or Polish or German or Arabic or whatever other language you want to learn, I think the takeaway for me personally, and as well as I would like you guys to take away, is no matter how hard the language may seem for you, just spend time in it. And you just spend like a little bit of time, like 1 week maybe, or not even that long. After spending just some time in that language, you may just find that you've surprised yourself not only with how much you've learned, but how much you can learn just through learning the language. It's quite surprising for me just how much I've been able to learn, how much I've been able to like fascinate about this, honestly. Obviously, like I say, I have been watching vlogs in the language, which has kind of helped me to kind of fill in maybe some of the gaps. But like, a language that once felt really impossible to obtain for many different reasons, Mandarin Chinese I'm talking about, now after only 1 week of spending time in this language and just listening to this language every day and just spending some time reading in this language and stuff, which sounds a lot more intense than it actually is. Like I say reading in the language, I'm just looking at words, translating them, and seeing which words stick and which words don't, because that's how I do it on Link, especially for the first little period of time when I'm new to a language. But for a language that seemed impossible for me to ever comprehend, impossible for me to ever learn, impossible for me to ever like converse in, after only 1 week, now all of a sudden seems really obtainable, and all of a sudden seems like a language that I could potentially learn to at least a decent level in the future, at least to a level where I can converse a little bit in. And I think the takeaway here is, you know, never be too scared to like start a new language or start a language which may seem too difficult, because you may just surprise yourself. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, this is Outstanding Rice. 再见.